Hello and welcome to The Print. PM Modi's visit to Russia has already kicked off, and as you know, this will be his first official bilateral visit overseas since taking over the prime ministership for the third time. To make sense of this visit, I have with me Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, who has had an illustrious career. He's also served in Moscow previously. I also have Dr. Rajorshi Roy from the IDSA, an associate fellow with the IDSA, who regularly participates in track two dialogues between India and Russia. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for
Thank you.
having me.
My first question I'd like to address to the ambassador. So let's talk about the timing of this visit. While Modi will be in Russia, the US President Joe Biden will be meeting world leaders in Washington, D.C. during the NATO summit. One of those world leaders will, of course, be the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. How do you see the optics of Modi's visit to Russia?
Well, I think that these two are, as far as India is concerned, the two disconnected events. We need not look at the NATO summit with the visit or this summit, which is happening between President Putin and Prime Minister Modi. Prime Minister Modi is traveling to Russia after about 5 years. The last time that they met was in 2019. And for 2, 3 years, we did not even have the summit meetings for various reasons, including the war. It also happens to be Prime Minister's first visit after the Russia-Ukraine war began in 2022. Despite all that, India has continued to maintain a policy which has been principled and which has been driven by dialogue, diplomacy, and peace based on the UN Charter. That very clearly indicates the contours are strategic, the sovereignty and territorial integrity. They are very much part of this whole thing. Prime Minister Modi went for the G7 summit, and at the G7 summit, he also met Zelensky and several other leaders. In my view, the timing is important in this sense that Prime Minister Modi and President Putin have a tremendous relationship, personal relationship, a great chemistry. They will be able to discuss everything that is on the table. And as his Kremlin's spokesperson said, there is nothing that is not on the table, basically. So everything is discussed, and Prime Minister Modi has discussed with President Putin several times about Russia-Ukraine war. Although Prime Minister Modi, in his departure statement, clearly said that going to review the bilateral relationship, but regional issues, global issues are equally important because Russia-Ukraine war and the other war, Middle Eastern war, are directly impacting the global South and India also in that sense. So, in my view, he would probably, because Zelensky had requested India to play a greater role, President Putin has also agreed and given his own plan. So, I think that Prime Minister Modi will be able to find out or assess for himself exactly what is going to be the meeting line and where it can happen. In my view, that will be one of the most significant achievements and discussions as far as the bilateral relations, the regional or global concerns are. But bilaterally, I think we have a very big menu, and there are so many issues that are discussed that a continuous relationship is in a very good frame at the moment. Of course, it is under stress because of various US and Western sanctions on Russia, but Russia has also moved with its Act Asia policy, and especially with India, they have a tremendous goodwill and opportunity to further enrich ties. There are many issues which we can discuss going forward.
Exactly. So we'll get into the nitty-gritties of the agenda of the visit. Before that, Dr. Roy, your view on the optics of this visit?
Right. I think I concur with Ambassador Trigunayat on the issue of not drawing a linkage between Prime Minister Modi's visit to Russia and the NATO summit, because the fact is that India and Russia, the ties, they are strong on their own. They stand on their own feet. There's a logic. There's a rationale behind this relationship. This visit is timely. It is long overdue. But the important part here is that it is a statement of intent on the part of India to strengthen ties with a traditional partner. Now, when we have an annual summit, which is the apex body of coordination mechanism, it will be an opportunity for India and Russia to not only reassess the trajectory of the ties, but also identify a blueprint for the future. Because the fact is that a lot of water has flown under the bridge since Prime Minister Modi last set shore on the Russian territory in 2019. There have been issues, there have been certain challenges, there have been certain dissonance. And therefore, I think this opportunity is crucial on three fronts in terms of symbolism, in terms of signaling, and also in terms of strengthening the salience of the India Russia strategic partnership.
I think I would agree with you, gentlemen, also in saying that this is a long time coming. And yes, Modi visited Russia in 2019. That was only to Vladivostok. In fact, the last time he visited Moscow, the capital city, was back in 2019. So if we think about it, it's almost been a decade since Modi has visited Moscow. And if I could come back to you, Ambassador Trigunayat, on the issue of Indian nationals stuck at the Russia-Ukraine war front. This is an issue which the Ministry of External Affairs confirmed in a press briefing last week, which will be spoken about at the highest level during this visit. Do you think both sides will be able to resolve this amicably, or do you see this as a potential source of friction going forward?
Well, I don't think there's going to be any friction in this. It is I mean, we need to understand how the people go abroad. I mean, there are various groups here in India, agencies that recruit people, try to mislead them, and they were not recruited to go on the war front, but then they were deployed there not by the Indian, but the Indian agencies in concert with their counterparts in Russia, because they were supposed to be working as, let's say, the people who were some kind of an odd job or something like that, but then they came into the line of fire. And this happens everywhere, wherever they go, because very often what happens, the contract. So that's something that we need to address at home. That is very important, number one. Number two is Russia has said that, and our ambassador has taken up many times with the Russians and also in the various discussions in the ministerial meeting that have happened, that these people must be returned and they must be allowed to come back. About 10 people are remaining, I believe, as far as I understand, out of the 50 who were reported there. But there is a larger point that we need to understand in this. And I think that this will be resolved in no time. It is quite possible for President Putin to get it done in 1 minute if he wants to, and it will be done. But at the same time, we must understand that Russia's population is declining. And for this war, they've been recruiting people from Gorkhas down to all the Central Asians and others. On the other hand, they have been asking the Indians to come. I mean, you mentioned about the visit to the Far Eastern Economic Forum in 2019, where Prime Minister Modi was the chief guest. Now, there also it was President Putin had offered that we would like to welcome Indian experts, Indian skilled and semi-skilled manpower to come and help them, because they are facing a real challenge, both strategically and otherwise. Strategically, because on the Far Eastern, the China is very much into ingress into that area, and they don't want that. They want that to be a balance. And I think in that sense, they've been asking more and more Indians to come and work in that. Of course, the conditions have to be proper, and that has to be monitored both by the immigration agencies as well as by our embassy in Moscow and Vladivostok and other places. We are hoping to open 2 more consulates. If that happens, then it will be much more easier for our people to find opportunities. Migration and mobility, as you know, Dr. Jaishankar has been signing with almost every country. That is being done. So it has to be looked into a larger context.
And when we, in fact, investigated this at ThePrint as well, sources told us that the issue of Indian nationals stuck in the Russia-Ukraine war could have potential links to human trafficking. So even identifying those Indian nationals in the Russian army is a task in itself. 4 Indians have died so far. You're right, the Indian government has been pressing hard on Russia and has even demanded a halt to the recruitment. But I will mention to our viewers, there was a sternly worded MEA statement last month that said that such activities would not be in consonance with our partnership with Russia. So let's see how this will be resolved. And if I can move to Dr. Roy, I wanted to ask you about, defense cooperation, of course, a huge and broad topic. India and Russia have been traditional partners in this sphere, but ever since the Ukraine war began, we've seen delays in certain military purchases. The S-400s is a good example, but of course, both sides are working towards that. Also, the maintenance of equipment that India has purchased from Russia still today requires, Moscow's help. and there's still not more indigenous capabilities required when it comes to maintenance. We saw in December 2021, when the 21st edition of the India Russia Annual Summit took place, that there was a 10-year military technical cooperation agreement that was signed. It was a 10-year agreement. Do you expect a new military agreement to come out of this visit? Do you see a major reassessment of defense cooperation? How do you view it?
Right. So I think that's a very valid and a pertinent question, because for a long time, the perception was that the defense relationship is the backbone of the India Russia strategic partnership. And the fact is that even today, more than 40 to 45% of our defense equipment, including the frontline ones, which is crucial for India's defense and deterrence, is of Russian origin. Now, given their shelf life, given that the fact that these are in use for more than 30, 40, even 50 years, the fact is that Russia is likely to be, or likely to continue to be, a pillar of India's defense and security for the foreseeable future. Now, what this also implies is that we have to deal with issues such as timely delivery of supplies, the issue of spare parts, the issue of localization of spare parts. And then you also need to juxtapose the India-Russia relationship with the fact that times have changed. The fact is that some kind of recalibration is in the offing. And that's par for course, because over dependence on any one particular source is inadvisable. But the fact is that, as I said, the shelf life of these defense equipment is huge. So Russia would continue to occupy a key pillar. I think last week there were reports of the AK-203 being inducted into the Indian Armed Forces, and these are going to be the mainstay of the Indian Armed Forces. So, which is an indication that Russia would continue to occupy areas where there is space. There are reports that the logistics agreement pact would be signed during this visit. That would, in a way, kind of add new dimension to the India-Russia strategic partnership. And I think in many ways, perhaps the onus is on Russia today to offer India or be a part of the Make in India program by offering technology which is cutting edge and which is unmatched. And at the end of the day, it's a competitive world out there. And in this, perhaps the fact is that Russia's track record in co-developing platforms with India, for example, BrahMos, which is seen as the best in the business, I think that should hold Russia in good stead. So I think in terms of defense, Russia will continue to occupy a crucial space. But in terms of the overall portfolio of Russian weapons in India will go down as India diversifies and also seeks to build indigenous technology.
Ambassador, your views?
Well, I fully agree with what Dr. Roy has said. There is no difference. But one thing I would say, that Russia does have a tremendous opportunity at this stage. And how I say is that because today the bilateral trade has gone up to $65 billion, and about $60 billion is in their favor. And therefore, that money, which is they can use in investing in strategic investments in Indian defense and other areas, infrastructure, if they so wish. I mean, if they take a longer view, this would provide them kind of stakeholdership that is not possible for any other country. As far as transfer of technology is concerned, I think that Russia has been the only country that has always provided us technology. Only problem is whether we are able to use it or not. BrahMos, as Dr. Roy said, mentioned, is one of the examples of a very good collaboration. And also these guns that are being just inducted. There are umpteen number of platforms. Now we're talking of S-400, so dependency goes on. Perhaps we'll look at the S-500. The thing is that whatever Russian equipment comes, you get is almost half the price that you get from the West. And from the West, the dependability is also much less. Whether they will come to you. I can tell you when Russia-Ukraine war was when we had problem at the Galvan, for example. At that time, when our defense minister had gone to Moscow and wanted Chinese or against the delivery of the S-400 against for us, and also for supplies of the spares. But at that time, whatever list we had provided to the Russians, they immediately agreed to provide that. I was there during the Kargil war, where the kind of assistance that we got. So as long as Putin is on the scene, I would say, the kind of trust, the kind of delivery mechanism, they'll continue. But the world is changing. We are also diversifying from 70%, we have come down to 39% of imports. But it has to be more into the make India kind of a domain now. And I think the Russians are waking up to that more, and they are willing to do that. And I think that will be one of the main areas. Secondly, we'll also hopefully our defense forces have taken a stock or analyzed the performance of the Russian equipment during this war, which has been going for 2.5 years. So it provides you a very good area of essential research, whether what is good, what is not so good. Russia is damn good in hypersonic weapons and the new weapon systems that are coming up. That's an area which provides us a possibility of collaboration with them. And I hope that is all will be discussed. And we have a military technical commission which meets before this and finalizes what are the key areas that are discussed by the two principals.
I completely agree with both of you. I feel there is also a level of trust that India enjoys with Russia when it comes to sharing of advanced technology. In fact, in 2017, the head of Rostec State Corporation, he was attending an event in Delhi, if I'm not wrong, where he said that even though India is ramping up its military cooperation with Israel, France, and the US, there's technology that Moscow gives India that no one else will give. And I suppose the point, Ambassador, you brought up about trade is a good segue into my question about the surplus rupees that Russia is having to deal with now on account of its vast energy exports to India. You know, that money in those Vostro accounts is clearly just rising, and there have been talks between India and Russia since last year on how Moscow can use this surplus rupees. Is it through business deals? Is it through investing in Indian government securities? Is it investing in Indian infrastructure? Of course, I think Delhi would be most pleased if investments were to be the path forward. But how do you see them working together on this issue of surplus rupees? Dr. Roy, please feel free to go forward.
Sure. Uh, I think this is an issue which is part of the wrinkles which have crept in the India-Russia strategic partnership, and I think this will be addressed. The issue of trade imbalance, the issue of Russian investments in India, and I think given the amount of surplus rupees that the Russians have in India, it makes sense for Russians to look for opportunities to invest. For example, Russians are very competitive when it comes to infrastructure, when it comes to railways, when it comes to road building, when it comes to bridges. And I think beyond just the issue of Russian investments in India, I think this summit is likely to explore areas where we can broad base our relationship beyond energy. Because today, the fact is that there is a significant amount of potential when it comes to unlocking the potential of the India-Russia relationship when it comes to trade. Now, obviously, that includes a free trade agreement with the Eurasian Economic Union. That includes the B2B, the business to business, as opposed to a G2G. That includes energizing the Russian North-South Transport Corridor, the Chennai-Vladivostok Maritime Corridor. That also includes the issue of coordination with third countries, for example, developmental partnerships in Central Asia, a nuclear power plant in Bangladesh. But the issue obviously here is, and also Indian investments in the Arctic and the Russian Far East. Now, the issue is the overhang of the Western sanctions, because at the end of the day, the business happens between private individuals. And if we are able to deftly navigate this issue of sanctions, I think we'll be able to truly unlock the economic potential between India and the wider Eurasian region.
Ambassador, would you like to weigh in?
Well, I think that this is an issue which has been discussed. I read some reports that these have been resolved, and the Russians have found adequate securities and other areas in which they like to invest. But if the pace of this continues, we'll have to be more innovative in what kind of investments are we looking at and what kind of returns, because the Russians are also looking at returns. Secondly, as you know, the Russia has completely stopped any usage of US dollars in its exchanges and its trade with any country. Yuan has become a major currency for the Russians, and India has declined to be part of it. And that is one of the reasons that in the BRICS also we have said this. So there is going to be a way. We have done it through dirhams, but I don't know how far and how long can we continue to do that. So I think that this usage of this funds, and as Dr. Roy mentioned, several other areas, I think we'll have to find it. This would require a constant monitoring and constant deployment of newer projects and better projects where the Russians feel equally interested. One of their concerns has been that it is extremely difficult to invest in India and to find the right kind of, because even the fault also lies with the Russians to some extent, that many of their businesses still think from the old Soviet mindset. So therefore, them operating in the system becomes a bit difficult for them. So market access issues are very important. One other area that's going to be very important, I think, collaboration for us would be in the Arctic. And in that context, the Chennai Vladivostok route would be very important, apart from the international north south transport corridor that we are working together. So there are going to be ways, of course, sanctions will continue, but I feel that sanctions are going to be a part of this emerging Cold War 2.0 kind of a scenario that will happen. So we'll have to develop some kind of a special purpose vehicles where we can work together and still, which can be basically the unilateral sanctions in that sense. So I think that so far, I don't know why we have not worked on it, but I've been telling it for a very long time that it should not be, we should not wait in a unilateral manner. So that's a very major issue that I think we need to be prepared for.
Gentlemen, before we wrap up, I do want to touch upon China. We look through the strategic lens of this visit, and the Russian perspective seems to be, in a way, this could be seen as a gain for them because they're able to tell, allies that they might be leaning on quite a bit. Hey, I've got options. And as far as India goes, there has been concerns to ensure that the way we engage with Russia ensures that the Russia-China alliance doesn't hurt our interests. And of course, there aren't any indicators to substantiate that Russia is acting in a way that would hurt our interests vis-a-vis China. But I was curious to ask both of you, how do you think the Chinese are viewing this visit? Ambassador, you could go first.
Well, number one, I would like to tell you that whatever little I know of India-Russia dynamic, today, you see, Russia is a country that does not want to be subservient to any country. Very often we say that they are going to become a junior player in the game. They still consider themselves as a major pole, despite their economic weaknesses. But at the same time, China, they need China, and China-Russia relationship is strong today, very strong, in the context of the Western challenge that they have against the United States and the West. But they are also wary about the Chinese designs overall, and they'll be historically pro. And I think there they need India to be part of them, to be able to leverage against the excessive Chinese influence or so-called hegemony, which eventually is going to come. So I think when we look at the India-China-Russia nexus, it should be seen in that context, that it is a leverage. And Russians are very happy with our strategic autonomy. Americans and others are not that happy. But this serves the purpose. It serves our purpose. It serves the general purpose that India today is in a position to talk to everybody and to deal with everyone. And we'll have to continue to manage that, because I personally feel that whenever there is a Cold War 2.0 kind of scenario led by China and the US, India would become a third pole, and that pole will be a countries of nations for strategic autonomy. So China would be looking at it with some concern, but China had a field day in the SCO. We have seen it. And I think that we should not allow SCO or any other grouping for that matter to be taken away by China unilaterally.
But your point about leverage is quite interesting, as in the Russians having leverage, because we've also seen how China has ramped up its influence in Central Asia, which is a key region for Russia, a region where Russia has played the traditional big brother, I suppose. And yet we're seeing a lot of Chinese investments in rare earths in Central Asia. After the SCO summit, the Tajikistan rolled out the red carpet for Chinese President Xi Jinping, and so therefore there is definitely an overlap, I would say, of interest between Russia and China and Central Asia, and that's also something, of course, that's interesting to keep one's eye on. Dr. Roy, I'd come back to you with the same question. How do you think the Chinese are looking at Modi's visit to Russia?
I think I'm sure China would be looking at this relationship, carefully examining the trajectory of this relationship. But then, from an Indian point of view, I think this is very important to look at the perception or the speculation or the conjecture. And there's also a lot of polarizing view in India that a weakened Russia today is likely to give concessions to China, particularly when it comes to India's interest. But the fact is, and as Ambassador Trigunayat pointed out, Russia and China, they are not natural allies. This embrace of China is a strategic necessity for Russia today to withstand the Western geopolitical pressure. Now, there is a lot of apprehension, there is a lot of distrust, inherent undercurrents. There is a lot of fear about China, about Russia being a subordinate partner of China, about the balance of ties tilting in favor of Beijing, about Russia being a junior partner. There are also fears of Pax Sinica in Central Asia. You referred to growing Chinese footprints, where the traditional division of labor between Russia and China, that Russia would take care of the security needs, China would take care of the economic needs, that division of labor is increasingly frayed. And I think it is in Russia's interest to not allow China to shape Russia's foreign policy when it comes to India, because a robust relationship with India gives Russia that much more breathing space in its evolving ties with China. So I think that's something that needs to be looked into. Now, when it comes to India, as far as managing this no limits partnership is concerned, I think the onus is on India to try to add more pillars to the India-Russia bilateral partnership to kind of wean Russia away from China. And it is hoped that Russia's abiding interest in India would prevent a Russia-China axis from taking steps which are inimical to India's interests. So for Russia's own strategic autonomy, it is likely that Russia would continue to maintain robust relations with India, not give China the concessions which China might want when it comes to the India-Russia partnership. Or for that matter, strengthening China vis-a-vis India.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Trigunayat and Dr. Roy, for
Thank you.
joining us
Thank
today.
you.
I think by the time this video goes up, Modi will be dining with Putin in Moscow. We'll be tracking this very important visit, as I'm sure you both will as well. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks for having me on the show.